Let us discuss this. You have expressed almost all the possible versions, and in general, you have formed the correct understanding. Overall, this correct understanding is expressed as follows. Each artifact is a complementary element, an element that completes a particular god. We have already discussed this, and we have established that it is precisely the Svartalfar who perform the function of determining which element each god was lacking. We have tried to understand why they determined it the way they did, and what drove them. By their very nature, they can perceive imperfection in a person. And not only in a person, but also in a god, including the being Kvasir, whom we also generally classify as a deity. You have thoroughly analyzed the deep meanings of the artifacts as the Svartalfar saw them, how they formed that understanding, and how they distributed the artifacts among the gods. Your general conclusion is correct. The artifacts help the gods, and so the Svartalfar help the gods accordingly. But what kind of help was it? In your reflections on this subject, you have quite rightly pointed out that perhaps this help could only be loosely called a charitable gift, in the sense that we now understand that term. From a magical perspective, the Svartalfar gave the gods an injection. And even though we have already discussed this, let us once more attempt to see and understand that a magical artifact will only be of help if one masters it. To grasp what I am referring to, let us return to the very first lesson, when we discussed the difference between magic and sorcery. I will briefly remind you of that crucial moment when we described how one becomes a sorcerer. How this excessiveness arises due to some external tension. And a person extracts this excessiveness from within. They extract it under certain conditions, that is, they shape it into a specific form. This form and these conditions are established by certain forces. Let us call them that for now. Forces that will later become the holders of this agreement, this condition. In culture, mythology, mysticism, and occultism, such an isolated and self-contained excess is usually called a sorcerer's assistant. A demon, a devil, an elemental, a fetch, or a familiar. It depends on which culture is describing it. And this very moment of interaction between a sorcerer and his assistant is essentially his struggle with himself. A struggle with his extracted part that he once failed to master. If he succeeds in mastering it, he becomes a mage. If he fails, then, as Christians would say, he loses his soul. That is, he loses his right to independence, and he loses his right to freedom. Because what is the struggle between a sorcerer and his assistant? It is a struggle with oneself. And that is exactly what it is, for there is a part that a sorcerer once failed to confront, and that part has a certain programmed function. It begins to help the sorcerer. Are these not our artifacts? The artifacts that the Svartalfar bestowed upon the gods are also objects that help them. And perhaps our assumption will be correct if we imagine that these objects were not simply created and given to the gods, but that they were also once their excessive part, only they took on a different form. To attempt to see this, let us take a step back and look at the Svartalfar again, considering them within the system of the Yggdrasil tree. The world of Svartalfheimr, and, accordingly, its inhabitants, the Svartalfar, both dwarves and dark elves, are located in the lower part of the tree. Their presence in this region, as well as their proximity to the informational worlds of Jotunheimr, Niflheimr and, of course, Helheimr, is no coincidence. These worlds are associated with the proto-foundation evil. We find a clue in the legends of the creation of Svartalfheimr and the tales of how the exiled dark elves came to settle there, those who were once light elves but lost a certain war. This story, as we know, closely parallels other myths of the fallen, and in due time we will analyze it quite thoroughly, but from a slightly different perspective. In Norse mythology, there is no distinct branch or narrative that details how the War of the Elves unfolded, how the elves became the drow, or how they came to inhabit the world of Svartalfheimr. The classical myth does not emphasize this. It is only highlighted in a parallel mythology, which, looking ahead, I will explain, has just as much right to exist as the original. The fact that this parallel mythology wove itself into the main myth in the 20th century is no coincidence. In the world of information, nothing happens by chance. It is merely the necessary filling of a gap required by researchers, by descendants, and by followers of the Norse tradition in order to properly understand the essence of the world of Svartalfheimr. Those who get there are the defeated. Let us call them that for now, the defeated. From the perspective of Norse myth, the defeated also enter Helheimr, but they do not reach it immediately. We know that Helheimr is related to the proto-foundation chaos, which lacks informational power. It is the energy of chaos, the energy of future creation. In contrast, Niflheimr receives pure, key information, the essence itself. And while Jotunheimr receives historical information, the information about the process, Helheimr holds information about the result. Thus, information about the process goes to Jotunheimr, while information about the result goes to Helheimr, and consequently, energy goes to Helheimr. All of this is connected at the point of Svartalfheimr, which holds the process of how it all reaches there. In other words, before it enters a particular world, it must first be separated. In Svartalfheimr, the dwarves, masterful blacksmiths, not only create magnificent artifacts, but also refine the very materials from which they are made. And when something unnecessary to the 9 worlds leaves the system, it must be broken down into its component parts, and so they broke it down. The history of what has happened goes to Jotunheimer, where a complete memory of all that has been is preserved. Niflheimer receives the essence of what has passed, meaning the world of darkness holds what is no longer needed by the tree at this moment in time. And the energy component goes to Helheimr, or more precisely, to the proto-foundation chaos, because the world of Hell occupies the space between Helheimr and Niflheimer, and the segment between the proto-foundation darkness and the proto-foundation chaos is the domain of the goddess Hel. Some things leave the tree forever, while others stay in the world of Hell. Everything that has not yet reached the stage of complete disembodiment remains in Helheimr. And the necessary separation takes place in Svartalfheimr. Where energy must be separated from information. And this information is considered without an energetic component, that is, without energy, without emotion. The Svartalfar possess information, and it is from this information that they create their artefacts. In fact, they take the essence of what has become useless to the tree and reshape it, giving it a new form, a second chance. What was it before it fell into the hands of the Svartalfar? It could have been anything, a phenomenon, an event, a person, a god, a world, anything. But it cannot return in its old form. It takes a new form and returns again. The essence remains the same. Only the form changes, with the assumption that perhaps the problem lies not in the essence of why this vanished phenomenon, event or thing has become unnecessary, but rather in its form. And if it is given a different form, perhaps everything will be slightly different. And it is this new form that the Svartalfar have created. Knowing that the master dwarves can clearly identify the missing element, we can assume that the artifacts were the very excess that their future owners, the gods, had once rejected. The Svartalfar simply gave it a new form and made it acceptable to the receivers of these gifts. And so, these artifacts that we know from myth are worth looking at from that perspective as well. You have correctly identified the artifacts and their essence. But also try to see that all of these magnificent gifts have been returned to the gods because they once belonged to them, just in a different form. The spear Gungnir, representing absolute precision. The ship, the boar, the sword, and of course, the hammer in its altered form, thanks to Loki's intervention. And finally, the ring that sparked so much of your discussion. You correctly deduce that the ring was needed to replicate and reproduce the elements of the proto-foundation good. That could not be duplicated in the realm of Helheimr. For the design of the ring is based on the principle of time. It does not function continuously, it functions periodically, which means that the factor of time is involved, the very factor that is absent in Helheimr, where time does not exist. So, the ring could not function there, and so it was returned to Odin. Returned again. This is the source of the ring's fearsome reputation. Which was later accurately reflected in the song of the Nibelungs and the Saga of the Volsungs, where the ring is described as bringing misfortune. Why does it bring misfortune? Because it was made in the world of evil. It is the very evil that people once rejected because they saw it as evil. The fact that the ring has changed form does not mean that it has ceased to be evil. In fact, every artifact, and especially the ring, is an injection that tests the strength of one's convictions each time, much like the war between a sorcerer and his assistant. If a person succeeds in overcoming it, and not just a person, but a god, of course, if they succeed in overcoming what they once rejected in another form, then they elevate their status, and the artifact truly becomes a gift. But if they fail, if the gift turns out to be stronger, meaning that the very evil, the very part they once rejected, still proves to be stronger than them, then the gift turns into a curse. This is exactly what happened to the Nibelungs, the Volsungs, and other dynasties that could not deal with their own rejected trait. We know many of these stories about cursed stones, cursed objects. Their curse is not that someone deliberately cursed them. These things are the very artifacts from the world of Svartalfheim that have returned to their former owners for another battle. And in that battle, there is a kind of test, an examination. In the time that this symbol of evil has been separated from you, have you grown stronger? Were you able to independently fill the void created by the rejection of a part of yourself that you considered excessive? Have you gained the personal experience necessary to confront this part of your past that you once failed to overcome? And this question belongs in the same category as the scenario of the sorcerer's battle with his own force. Who will win? Am I stronger than you, or are you still stronger than me? Such a battle cannot be repeated, in the sense that one cannot return to it again and again. For those who follow the path of magic, it happens only once. You know this. You have gone through it in the runes department, in the second course of the runes department, during your work on the Hell's Channel. Those who have walked this path know the rule. Hell will temporarily take your excess, give you time to develop experience, rights, strength, and willpower without it, without that oppressive part, and then return to hell to take that part back. It must be taken back, that information. And as it goes through the forge of the blacksmiths, the dwarves, of course, it will take a different form. You will always receive it in a different form, perhaps perceiving it as a gift, as a magical gift and good fortune, or not perceiving it as such. It all depends on the form. After all, form is an assessment of the mental body, and in the mental body, not everything is always true, because it is merely a description of the world view. Today, excessive evil is returning to you in a different form. It aligns with your worldview, and your worldview defines it as a gift or a curse, as good or evil. Speaking in magical terms, it is always evil. Speaking in human terms, it is not. But we are talking about magic. Any such magical gift is essentially a gift from the world of evil. But whether it becomes a gift or a curse depends solely on the strength of the one who receives it.